Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. With this video I'm going to start a series where we discuss some interesting list builds, and I will first focus on the Vampire Covenant. So I'm going to go through the different bloodlines for Vampire Covenant, proposing some interesting ideas for the different builds that you can do with them. And the first one up is going to be Nosferatu. I think in the current meta with the current book and the current point values, this is one of the most appealing choices. It's also a choice that, yeah, some people are quite familiar with it, but I would say that generally people tend to field more the Blood of the Dragon lists and Lamia lists or independent lists. So maybe Nosferatu is not known to you yet. Let's go to an example list. I think this is one of the most potent lists with Nosferatu that you can build. It's been put together by Mikey Newman, who is participating in the Black Country Brawl. Yeah, I saw it online and I thought it was a really cool list because I did play around with Nosferatu a little bit myself, and I did make some choices in my army that he also had to take, and he does it in a really good way. So let's first focus on the character setup of the list. This is going to be possibly the most important part of the Nosferatu list because it leans very heavily on your characters. But then again, you also want to keep them as cheap as possible to still get sufficient troops on the battlefield that can actually perform. Because Nosferatu, it is the wizarding, the magic bloodline of the Vampire Covenant. So whereas Blood of the Dragon Vampire Counts, for example, give you a very decent damage output, the Vampire Counts of Nosferatu don't exactly do that. So the Nosferatu bloodline, the bloodline itself is free, so it doesn't cost any points at all. The vampire suffers -1 attack value, -2 offensive skill, may not be equipped with heavy armor and or a shield, so those are all just terrible nerfs to your vampire if you want to gear him for combat. However, a vampire count still will end up with 4 attacks at strength 5 with offensive 5. It's not too bad, but for a expensive character, it's not that good either. And defensively, not getting heavy armor or a shield is quite crippling to quite a lot of combat setups. The vampire does gain awakens, skeletons, and zombies. So in addition to zombies, you can now also increase skeletons beyond their starting size, and you get Gates of the Netherworld. This is the power that the necromancers start out with. That if you cast Arise, so the raise spell in Vampire Covenant, then you get to heal a wound within 12 inches of your model, which is quite good. Quite a good skill, especially if you play with models that have a very high wound cost. So, for example, a Dark Coach or a Zombie Dragon. A Vampire Courtier must be upgraded to a Wizard Apprentice, Wizard Adept, or Wizard Master, and a Vampire Count must be upgraded to a Wizard Adept or Wizard Master. That is not too bad because that is basically the point why you play this bloodline. The vampire also always knows the hereditary spell in addition to its other spells, so you don't have to use up a spell slot for that. Normally with the magical heirloom that would be like 50 points nowadays, I believe. So yeah, just having this for free, basically it offsets the -1 attack value, -2 offensive skill, and the armor restrictions. But you also still gain awaken and Gaze of the Night. I think it's by itself it's already a good upgrade. If you gear your vampires towards not going into combat themselves. And your path access is replaced from occultism and avocation to cosmology, occultism, and avocation. And then, yeah, with a vampire bloodline army, you are mostly gonna take the ancient blood power because that is a reason to stray away from an independent bloodline unless you want to field the same blood power on multiple vampires. But for Nosferatu, the ancient blood power is going to be the most influential, I think, out of everything that makes Nosferatu Nosferatu. This is blood magic, so during spell selection you choose a path. This is likely going to be Cosmology if you play Cosmology on your Wizard Master. And when a vampire or a friendly wizard within 12 inches casts the hereditary spell or any spell from the chosen path, so all of your arises fall under that, and also The cosmology spells fall under that. The casting value of the spell is reduced by 2, and when rolling casting rolls with a single magic die, a natural roll of 1 or 2 on the magic dice is always failed. When a vampire or a friendly wizard within 12 inches miscasts, it suffers a +1 miscast modifier. This is the clause that scared me at first a bit, because I did look at Nosferatu like 4 years ago already or something, and the blood power hasn't really changed. And then it was really daunting to me that you get a +1 on your miscast. It also used to be way more expensive than 50 points. But in the end, if you count it out, you don't really throw 3 dice at any spell anymore, so then you don't get any miscasts anyway. Except if you really want to get a spell through, then you can throw multiple dice. But you have so many spells in your army that there's a bit of an overlap, and you basically want to get the profit out of your blood magic for every single time you can. Yeah, so lore-wise, what does this mean? Normally a rise you can cast on a 4-up on a single target, on a 8-up in a 6-inch aura, and on a 11-up, I believe, on a 12-inch aura. You can still do that. You're going to get a -2 on the casting value, so now you cast the single target spell on a 2-up, on the aura on a 6-up, and the 12-inch aura on a 9-up. So that would still be a situation where you might want to 3-dice it if you want to raise in a 12-inch aura. However, you can also build your army list in such a way that you're only ever going to need a 6-inch aura, and then it's going to be fine. And you are a wizard master, so this 6-inch aura, normally it would be on a 6-up, you get a +1 to cast, so it's only a 5-up on the dice, making it quite nice to cast on 2 dice. So that is basically the magic setup. You have that with cosmology. Cosmology is a path with reasonable casting values. I think taking cosmology really makes sense with the Nosferatu bloodline, because not only are they generally useful spells, also the casting value decrease of -2 makes quite a difference, coupled with the +1 to cast from your wizard master, and also the cosmology attribute, where you get a +1 to cast basically, or a -1 on the casting requirement of the spell if you cast first the opposing aspect spell first. So if you first, for example, cast the touch the heart augment, then you have a -1 on the casting value for the hex of perception or strength. What does this result into? So you have a wizard master +1, you have -2 from the blood magic, you have possibly -1 from cosmology. So basically you're looking at a -4 on the casting value total. Which means that Ice and Fire, it's normally a 7+. There are scenarios where you can suddenly cast it on a 3+. So instead of using 2 dice and still taking some risk with that, you can cast it on 1 die and succeed 2/3 of the time. Perception of Strength, it's going to be a 4+ under the ideal circumstances. Unity and Divergence, a 5+. Touch the Heart, a 3+. And Touch the Heart on a 3+ is really interesting. So suddenly your output in terms of spells is just amazing. Being able to cast your Hereditary multiple times, possibly successfully, and if you don't manage to cast your Hereditary, then probably you're gonna be able to cast some other spells that really buff up your army quite well. He pairs this up with a Vampire Crochet with Avocation. I think this is to open the play for snipes, because then you also have access to Hasten the Hour, so then you can combine Hasten the Hour and Touch the Heart. And also Avocation is just a really good lore for vampires in general, with the reroll to hit and the reroll to wound, and possibly the -1 discipline on your opponent units. You're going to get 2 spells of Avocation, and you're going to get your Hereditary because you're a Nosferatu Vampire Crochet. He made it under the Battle Standard Bearer. I think this is a really good upgrade in general in the Vampire Covenant book, because you just save out on so many crumbles. And then he has the Book of Arcane Mastery, so the first casting attempt of the Bearer is going to be at a +2 to cast. So you have the +2 to cast, you have the -2 requirement of blood magic. So yeah, that's still going to amp up your casting a bit more. I don't know if it would make more sense to get a Talisman of the Void instead of the Book of Arcane Mastery, but I can imagine that the book is really good. Because basically the book is a +2, a single dice is a 3.5 on average, so Talisman of the Void is 1/3 of a dice, so then that would be 1.16 on average. And then a +2 is just straight better, normally. Then we have the Necromancer. This is mostly to get in your third Arise. You could also play the what's it called? The Unholy Tome? No, the Necromantic Staff on your Vampire count. I think that could still be an upgrade to the list because there is room in terms of points for that. I don't know why he went for a Necromancer here. However, if your general gets killed, then in this case, the Courtier and the Necromancer can both take over as the master of the army. However, reasonably, if your Wizard Master dies, then it's not good. It's not a good time. So I think you could still replace the Necromancer with the Necromantic Staff. However, then you have just the bounce spell version of the Arise and not the targeted one at 18 inches 3 times. So if you really need to get an Arise somewhere, then this is better. Anyway, this is basically the bulk of the list. This is what the list relies on. So realistically, you're gonna make 5, maybe 6 casting attempts every single turn, which is quite a bit more than most armies. And it's really up to your opponent to dispel them. So the funny thing is with casting, like if you have a spell on a 3+ and you cast with 1 dice, you have a 2/3 chance of making it, so it's good revenue basically. And there's not that many chances of your opponent being able to dispel with 1 dice, or at least not to take the risk. So if you cast it on a 3, sure, then there's a chance that your opponent might go for a 1 dice dispel. However, if you have a 4, then it's already 50-50 only for your opponent to dispel it with 1 dice. So he'll likely just already put 2 dice against that. And for turns where you have like a 5-7 or something, then in the end, if it goes like that, your opponent he's gonna have the situation where he either is gonna dispel 2 spells with 2 dice and 1 spell with 1 dice, or he's gonna dispel 1 with 3 and 1 with 2. But that means that you're still gonna get 3 or 4 spells through, and you have so many spells and you have so many repetitions in your Arise also, that at some point you can just push stuff through that your opponent really doesn't want you to get. So I think that is the main strength of Nosferatu, of being able to force through spells that your opponent really doesn't want. Like normally with Magic, you have the situation where there's this 1 spell that you have to stop. With Nosferatu, there's 3 spells you have to stop, and you can only stop 1. Yeah, so that's going to be about the characters. Then we'll look at the core setup, how he handles this with respect to Nosferatu. So he has 32 skeletons with halberd, standard bearer, the running banner, musician, and champion. And normally in any Vampire Covenant list, I would say no, don't do this, don't go for the halberds, don't even go for the spears. Also, spears you could still pull off with Lamia, but I wouldn't necessarily go for halberds in any scenario other than with Nosferatu, because this is one of your damage dealing units actually. So sure, they only have offensive 2, defensive 2. They only have agility 2, but by the time that you encounter your opponent, you will have cast a couple of times Rise on this unit. So it will be more like 45 skeletons, even if it's not more, because you're going to reanimate d6 + 4 per single casting attempt that you make. And then, at the point that you're going to have combat, it's going to be like 45 skeletons. They are going to have either a reroll to hit or a reroll to wound, or a perception of strength. And with a perception of strength, you're looking at strength 5, AP2 skeletons. So that is really scary. With the running banner, even AP3. You can, at that point, just put them in horde and just chop with your halberd skeletons. The other option is to just make a big bus out of it and have them be steadfast for, yeah, just the rest of the game basically. And that is the 30 skeletons with the Legion standard. So I like the duality in this skeleton setup here. They're both going to grow at the same pace basically. Then you have zombies. There's also people that would play either just skeletons also for the vampire counts and the Corche. This is a setup where you just put your count or you count your Corche and your Necromancer and the zombies, and you really don't want your opponent to get to them. But I think it's the better play because that makes it also really clear for yourself whether you want your opponent to be able to engage your vampires at any point or not. And alternatively, you could get out your vampire count, for example, with a Destiny's Call and your Corche with an Essence of Mithril, and then still go into some fights. But this makes it really clear that you don't wanna fight. And then he has 8 direwolves with a champion to basically block the really fast lists through their vanguard. And if you have the first turn, you can vanguard, you can move up and block the entire front line of your opponent, basically to buy you an extra turn. Then you have 2 units of Bat Swarms. Bat Swarms are core units that are just mobile enough to function as chaff in Vampire Covenant with a 12-inch fly. And yeah, basically they're not going to do anything other than that. But in special, you would have to pay for Great Bats. Great Bats have a bit higher mobility. They're 90 points instead of now 110. But then again, these are special points, and here you're using up core points. I think this is a really good setup because you also have a bit of a variety in what you bring. You don't have 3 blocks of skeletons and that's it. And in the end, just the skeletons. It's incredible how little points they cost by the time you realize how much effort it takes for your opponent to get rid of them. Yeah, so I think this is probably the best core setup that you can do with Nosferatu. Then we will continue with the special and the swift death categories. So I didn't really make a division here, but basically the ghasts and the cadaver wagon, they're from special slots, and the vampire spawn and the winged reapers are from swift death categories. Yeah, ghasts, you don't really see them that often in Vampire Covenant lists, even though they have really good value for their point costs in terms of defensive stats. I think it's also because the additional models are actually quite expensive, whilst the initial models are really cheap. And well, Vampire Covenant really benefits from having big units, so that also makes sense in that sense. You have a cadaver wagon with it. Cadaver wagons used to be really expensive because they used to be 305 points or so, and then now they have been dropped to 260 points, making them quite an interesting choice. But you didn't really see many cadaver wagons, well, mostly because of the cost probably, and also it forces your army in a little bit of a bubble style. So that is the downside of picking this cadaver wagon. Basically, it's going to go probably in the zombies because the damage output of the model itself is not impressive at all, and it's mostly going to buff your infantry. Then. Yeah, I'll just talk a bit more about the ghasts. So the ghasts, they are, you have a unit of 8 for 610 points. It's just monstrous infantry. It has advance of 6, march of 12. It doesn't have any swift stride. However, where they shine is just 3 hit points with resilience 5 and a fortitude 5 up. And from the cadaver wagon, you actually get a 4 up fortitude if you're within 6 inches of the cadaver wagon. I don't think it's really necessary to play them within 6 inches of the cadaver wagon, but for a little bit tougher matchups, it might be worth it. What's also important to note is that they have a reanimation of D3 plus 1, so every single time you cast a rise on them, you're going to get D3 plus 1 wounds back. And that doesn't seem that much, and that's true. However, in a list where you actually count on gaining back wounds like once or maybe twice per turn, if you're really lucky, D3 plus 1 wounds, if you manage to get 2D3 plus 2 wounds back, and you still have the Gates of the Netherworld attribute or special power on all of your characters, that's an extra wound somewhere, which likely is going to be either on your ghasts, or your vampire spawn, or winged reapers. Then it really starts to come through, especially in combination with some other supporting magic. So in most Vampire Covenant lists, you don't really have the tools to increase the offensive output of the ghasts. So you're going to be stuck with 3 attacks at strength 4 with AP 1 with poison attacks, and you already have the built-in Unholy Appetite to give you rerolls in ongoing combat, rerolls to hit, that is. With the Nosferatu, you are kind of certain to either get a reroll to wound or a +1 strength from Perception of Strength. And Perception of Strength brings these guys to strength 5 AP 2, which is, yeah, then it really starts to pull through, especially already with the reroll to hit that you already have. So unit of 8, it's going to be 24 hit points. That's really tough to shift with Resilience 5. There's a couple of matchups that can really deal with that unit, but a lot of units will not be able to deal with this at all, to be honest. And then the Cadaver Wagon, well, I think it's mostly to buff the core, because they get, in the first round of combat, they get a 5-up fortitude instead of even a 6-up. And yeah, it's still a little bit of a question of whether it would be worth it or not. I think in the end it can be really worth it, because, well, if you get the 5-up fortitude, even in the first round of combat, it does conflict a little bit with the Unity and Divergence spell from Cosmology that gives you an Aegis 5-up. However, these skeletons with the Legion standard, you're going to have 4 ranks, you're going to have a banner. So that's a static combat res of 5. And then if you also have a 5-up fortitude standard on your skeletons that already have parry, then you're really gonna go for the combat res. And this really makes sure that you don't lose too many skeletons, and you're really set up for the grind, basically. Yeah, so I think that's a really cool choice in the army. I could imagine that the list could maybe use something that can act more independent, because most Vampire Covenant lists, they have some kind of march fixing, like some Varkalax or Dark Coach to be able to march somewhere else, or just a big bubble. And this list, that is the only thing that this list doesn't have. But basically, you're just going to keep your points unless your opponent is going to try to engage you. And if he tries to engage you, then that's quite likely that he will just not go through everything. Or by the time that he has been through your skeletons, if it's really a bad matchup, you can just first sacrifice up your bat swarms and your dire wolves. Then you're gonna be able to sacrifice your skeletons, and by that time you will still have nearly all of your points on the table, because then once that has happened, you're down 900 points more or less. You should have been able to catch 900 points of your opponent. So even in your bad matchups, I think it's not really a list that will lose very hard, even though the ghasts are obviously a choice with some specific counters, such as the Kingdom of Aquitaine character with D3 wounds on the charge, I believe. That's been a long time since I played against Kingdom of Aquitaine. But I don't believe there's a lot of stuff in the game that can really deal well with a unit of 8 ghasts that regenerate their wounds also. In addition, the Cadaver Wagon also gives you the Necromantic Aura, which is really nice. There's a little bit of overlap with the Winged Reapers there, because they also give it. And this gives you a -1 on the crumble, so that you crumble less on the important pieces. I think out of all the choices, the Cadaver Wagon, I like the less for the support pieces. So I like it most for just rank and file infantry. And then for the support pieces, like the Vampire Spawn, Winged Reapers, and the Ghasts, it just gives you a Fortitude 6-up on the Vampire Spawn and the Winged Reapers, and the Fortitude of the Ghasts is just improved by 1. So It can make a difference in some matchups, in some it won't really. But yeah, I think I'm quite curious to try it out myself also. Then the last bit of the list is going to be the Swift Death, so that's going to be the Vampire Spawn with the Champion and the Winged Reapers. And once again, you just have to consider the magic here. So basically, you have two flying units with a lot of hit points and quite some decent defensive stats. So the Vampire Spawn, they are quite vulnerable, but they do have a lot of hit points, having 24 hit points in the unit. And the Winged Reapers, they do have Resilience 5, and they have also a total of 16 hit points. So that's not too bad. They both have reanimation D3, so that is quite reasonable. It's at least higher than the reanimation 1. And the Vampire Spawn here are the really glass cannon type choice, based on the profile at least, and the Winged Reapers are a little bit more tanky. However, the Vampire Spawn, in the end, the 8 Vampire Spawn, they have 24 wounds in total, so they have a bit more wounds, but they have a lower resilience. Damage output wise, the Vampire Spawn are clearly at top here at 24 attacks with Battle Focus, and the Winged Reapers only have 16. Well, only 16, they still have 16 attacks. Yeah, these are basically the units that could do a lot of work. You have the Vampire Spawn with Frenzy, however, so that is also another reason to include a Battle Standard Bearer in the list, because he still gives you a reroll on this discipline test, because that is what a Battle Standard Bearer does anyway. And the Vampire count does give you Discipline 9 in the list. That does not really need to play very broad, so you will be able to have your Vampire Spawn within 9 inches of your general, or 12 inches of your general, sorry. Yeah, what you see in this list in general is also that they took just quite big units. This is because your magic really supports having big units, because then you can have a turn or two where you take quite some damage and then you can still repair from that. And instead of Vampire Knights or anything else, they took the Vampire Spawn and the Reapers, in the sense that these are flying units. I think this is really important with the way that the army is going to play, because you're going to play mostly quite defensively unless your opponent really cannot outmaneuver you. And if you play quite defensively, then you're going to set up your infantry to take the charge, and then you're going to be able to countercharge with your Winged Reapers or Vampire Spawn. And then it's quite important that you can't really be chaffed by anything. So the Winged Reapers and the Vampire Spawn especially, have a very long charge range. The Winged Reapers have a bit of a shorter one, but they have a smaller footprint as a unit. And yeah, if you cannot chaff them, large flying units, they are just the only way to chaff them basically is to put something in the position where they would end up with their charge. Like cover a flank with a steam tank or something, but then still the Winged Reapers, they do have lethal strike. So that might still be a problem for a steam tank. Yeah, on their own, they're already quite decent units. If you factor in the fact that they might get a reroll to hit, that's really going to help the Vampire Spawn with the battle focus. You can have the perception of strength to go to either strength 6 on either of the units, or to go effectively to resilience 5 on the Vampire Spawn, or resilience 6 on the Winged Reapers. This is going to be quite a tough list for any army to beat, I would say. Yeah, in terms of combat buffs, from Cosmology, you're going to mostly be looking at Perception of Strength and Unity and Divergence. You can still give an Aegis 5 up to your units. Even though in a lot of situations, you might still try to get in the bubble of the 6 up Fortitude from the Cadaver Wagon. And otherwise, you're going to look at the evocation spells that you selected. So either the -1 rest for your opponent, or a reroll to hit or to wound, depending on what your opponent is fielding. Yeah, the main thing to consider here, I think, is that these two units, they're already quite good without any supportive magic, and then if you factor in just the sheer amount of magic that you have in your list, it's just good. It's really, really good. One thing that I found quite refreshing in Mikey Newman's list was that the Winged Reapers don't have a weapon upgrade. I always took them with the paired weapons because I thought that offensive 6, being able to ignore parry, allowed me to also go into infantry blocks, and you get the extra attack. But then I usually play 3 Winged Reapers. 3 Winged Reapers with paired weapons come in at 515 points. The 4 Winged Reapers without any weapon upgrades are 620, so you're paying 100 points more, but you are getting 4 wounds more. If you are going to go into a unit that is 100 millimeters wide and you have the space to fit in 4 guys, then with this unit you're going to get 16 attacks. With the unit of 3 models, you're going to get 15 attacks with the paired weapons. The paired weapons would ignore parry. Your offensive, well, it goes up by 1 with the paired weapon, so you go from offensive 5 to 6. In most situations, that doesn't make a difference. And yeah, the ignore parry, you don't really need it because most infantry, they already have resilience 4 max. So your 16 attacks at strength 5 with still 4 storms at strength 5 is likely going to be enough to get through them. And the paired weapons is basically the upgrade to go for infantry stomping. Halberd could also still be an option, but basically you have just perception of strength in your list. They already have lethal strike, so it makes the Halberd less interesting because you don't need the IP as much. I think, considering that that's like 60 points to upgrade your unit to either weapon choice, it makes sense that you don't put any weapon upgrade on the unit. So all in all, that is the entire list. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna in the future also lay out some deployments for lists or anything, but please let me know in the comments also what you would like to see. So options would be that I just push around some units on the board to show you some interactions and some play styles, or we can just keep it to list discussions like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time.